Back when I used to read more economics literature, the thing that really stuck out to me, and I think maybe the greatest lesson you can take from economics, is the idea that you have to look beyond stage one thinking. And my understanding of stage one thinking is you only look at the immediate impact of something, whether or not it solves an immediate issue, and not what the long term consequences are, or whether it'll actually make the problem worse uh, once you get to the like stage two. So stage one is it does something, and then stage two is the secondary impacts of it. Probably the best example I've seen recently is the Biden administration said we're going to deal with inflation by printing money and giving it to families. And I guess in the short term, when they get the check, they might be able to go and buy groceries, but that's just going to make inflation worse by making the money supply larger. Similarly, when it comes to things like green energy, you have a lot of people who are well intentioned and they think, okay, greenhouse gases are bad, burning coal and oil is bad. We need to do renewable energy like solar power or wind power or stuff like that. But they don't really think, okay, well, what about getting the lithium to make batteries? What about the rare earth materials, the magnets, all these different things that come with it that might actually wind up doing more damage to the environment because they're just kind of trying to solve the immediate short term issue. And it's like, okay, there's a board you need to hammer in. It's hammered in, it's done. We don't have to think about it anymore. And this doesn't just apply to public policy issues, this also applies to a lot of things in life. Now, the particular subject I want to talk about that we can kind of apply this principle to is the whole concept of value for money, fiscal responsibility, evaluations, making sure you know where every penny goes. Now, over the course of my career, I worked a lot in both the public and private sector. And I can say that in a lot of cases, I find the focus on value for money, financial responsibility, evaluation and stuff can do more harm than good. And rather than make things more efficient or reduce costs, it can have the opposite impact. So maybe let's just take a step back. So, the heart of kind of the fiscal conservative movement is the idea that government spends too much money, it pays its employees too much. A lot of people in government are living these lavish lifestyles. They have unrealistically high pensions. They're padding their own budgets. There are a lot of programs that aren't really having any kind of impact. And that by imposing more discipline on the public sector, that is reducing budgets, making people accountable for every dollar spent, evaluating the cost effectiveness of programs, doing other stuff like privatizing certain things, using temporary workers or contractors instead of full time employees, that this will save the government money and this can be transferred on to the public in the form of tax cuts. And I mean, on the surface, this is a laudable goal. I mean, no one wants to waste money. No one wants programs that don't actually do what they're supposed to do to go forward. Nobody wants people skimming off the top. Nobody wants any of this. And it sounds very rhetorically good. And that's kind of one of the issues with politics, particularly in a democratic society, is it's very prone to stage one thinking. It's like we need to give more money to poor people. How are you going to do that? Is that actually going to help? Is that just going to cause inflation? We don't know, but we have a problem and we have to immediately solve it. So, well, in a lot of cases, I'm sure kind of fiscally conservative and fiscally responsible measures does save money. The problem with it is how is that actually implemented on the ground level? Now, the concept of value for money sounds really good, but how do you determine that? What does value for money really mean? It means you kind of have to somehow quantify things. You have to see how much money is the program spending, what are the impacts, what's the dollar per impact. And the issue to do that is you need someone to do that analysis. And so you have to add on, like if it's the Ministry of Education or something, you have to add on a whole department to do standardized testing, to test the effectiveness of initiatives. And it creates a lot of additional bureaucracy, a lot of additional staff. at a lot of additional costs. And it's kind of funny, if I can use a video game reference, in Democracy 4, you can have a welfare fraud office. And if you fund at a certain point, it reduces, you get a negative balance for welfare fraud because it's costing more to try to go after people who are abusing welfare than it does to just let people fraudulently go after it. And I'm not saying, once again, that you shouldn't evaluate programs and people shouldn't be concerned about value for money. My point is just, I think when people talk about that and we need more accountability, they don't really have a concept of how much is already there, and that a lot of the accountability measures are what's making these things. And the other thing is, it makes things a lot less efficient and it takes up more time, and time is money. So because everything has to be financially accountable and everything has to be accounted for, it's kind of interesting because a lot of people who are like fiscally conservative or whatever will say that, but what that means in practice is that's why you have to fill things out in triplicate. That's why there's a big like chain of people who have to approve something, because every single dollar needs to be documented and someone in a position of power has to be able to sign off on it, and you need a whole department to see if you're getting good value for money off of something. Like an experience I have is something that I find valuable is Bandicam, which I use to record my videos, but I've also used it at work in the past because it's very convenient to take screenshots with. And it's about $20 or so. Now, if I wanted to get that, if I'm working in the public sector, and this is also true in the private sector, bureaucracy isn't as bad, but you still have similar issues. You have to write up a business case, you have to get like 20 different signatures, you have to go to like the funding department. And to get like that $20 program, it can take, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours or more of work. And if you're paying someone $30 an hour, you can get it dozens of times the amount of time it was going to take to solve. Whereas if you just gave departments like an office budget, then they could just like go, okay, just here, buy it if you need it, or something like that. And it's the same thing for stuff like office supplies, where you need to get some pens and you need to get a grant for that and stuff, because everything needs to be accounted for. And once again, this is also very true in the private sector, where like the accounting department or the human resources department or the funding department will need to sign off on literally everything. There's no kind of discretionary money that managers can just use for stuff. I know in some a lot of places in both the private and public sector, there's slush funds, and the slush fund is literally just the manager has a couple $100 in petty cash that they've either collected or that they themselves have provided, and they use that for just like really basic stuff that they don't want to take the time to fill stuff out for. And I mean, is that really an efficient use of people's time if they're having to fill all these reports out and stuff? Now, once again, I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't evaluate things and people shouldn't be accountable and you shouldn't track where money's going. I'm just saying that you have to kind of look at these things beyond just stage one, very basic thinking. And it kind of in a recent examples when they're hiring all the IRS agents, and a lot of conservatives were complaining, it's like they're the people who find things like financial fraud. They're the people who audit people and make sure they're not doing bad things with money. Now, I understand a lot of that is just going to be used as a weaponized political tool, like how the Obama administration went after a lot of conservative organizations. But a lot of time, like the department, they don't want to hire. They're like, the government's spending all this money to hire people to do evaluation or paperwork or stuff. And most of that, a lot of that is just a product of the need to save money. So what often happens is that gets cut, and then that further just slows the process down. And then the alternative, though, is that you give a lot more discretionary power to managers and stuff like that. But then there's always the concern they're going to skin money or they're going to blow it on frivolities or stuff like that. And I find that a lot more the case in the private sector, where if you give managers any kind of discretion, they will immediately just spend it on luxuries, on like expensive lunches or other prestigious things, while not wanting to spend any money on things like employee training or like new computers or software, or invest in capital goods. So it's just kind of an ongoing problem, but it's something that's both in the private and public sector. And once again, I not necessarily saying that you shouldn't be doing any of these things, just that I think in a lot of cases people fail to consider the impacts of a lot of their actions and their impacts of a lot of uh, what the consequences are. So hopefully you found that interesting. Have a good day, everyone. God bless, and more great content to come.